Meet David Amos, the managing director of Plus Zero Limited, who has built multiple high-performance teams, led innovative change projects. With his involvement in the green hydrogen and clean power solutions, Amos combines deep technical insight with strategic vision, making him a highly sought-after leader in Plus Zero Limited.
Thank you for coming. And for those who do not know you, I would like for you to introduce yourself and what you do, of course.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kayode, for inviting me. So I'm David Amos, the founder and managing director of a company called Plus Zero, and we are focused in the clean energy sector, producing hydrogen and using hydrogen to support the decarbonisation.
Awesome. I usually like to start from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Who is David Amos? I would like to know his background. How did you grow up?
Okay, so I grew up in the borders of Scotland, in a rural farming area in and around a small town called Kelso. And then I went to university in Edinburgh. That's where both my parents were from, and studied in Edinburgh. And then have spent most of my life working in and around Edinburgh, in a whole range of areas, but quite a lot of my career, which has been a little bit of a varied trajectory, but a lot of that has been in the public sector, working in local government, and had a spell in central government, but also between that had spells in the private sector, running my own business, and then latterly running some quite large multi-stakeholder projects with public sector funded projects involving government, local government, universities, private sector. And it was the last of those projects that I run, something called the Islands Growth Deal, that got me very interested and fired up about the opportunity that hydrogen offers to help address what's probably one of our most pressing problems at the moment, which is global warming.
Impressive. So I think I would still like to know a little bit more about your growing up years. Was there anything specific in your growing up here that informed what you are currently doing now as a business owner?
It's an interesting question. I was brought up in a strongly Christian household. My parents were evangelicals, so I had always been surrounded by quite a strong Christian ethos, and so trying to do the right thing by people, by community, but was, I guess, part of what I was exposed to from an early day. So one of the reasons I set Plus Zero up was to try and do something about climate change, which I think is going to already is having a massive impact, and a negative impact on so many people around the world. So I wanted to feel that I was actually doing something that might have a positive impact on that. So I guess you could potentially connect that back to the way I was kind of brought up, and that view that you're not here just to do right by yourself, but you're here to do the right thing for your family, for your community, and I guess the world more generally. So.
Impressive. Are you still a religious person?
No. It ultimately never talked to me. So I'm not religious in terms of following a standard religion. I would say I'm open-minded and spiritual, I would say, but I don't count myself as a follower of a particular religion.
Well, this is not a religious thing, but I'm just personally curious. Is there a reason for that?
Well, ultimately, it just didn't talk to me. And I struggle to reconcile what is written in religious books like the Bible with the reality of science and the world that I see. So I didn't. I was more driven by science and evidence in terms of how the world works, and so I say I felt there was a big disconnect between what was taught in religions and what I thought the reality of the world was.
That's okay. So let's talk about what you are currently doing with Plus Zero right now. How did you decide? How did you form the decision to go into that space?
So I'd had the experience of running businesses before. When I graduated, I ended up helping my older brother, run his building business for a while, and that gave me my first taste of what it was like to be in business. And despite that business not being successful, it did spark an interest in me in running a business. And then about 10 years later than that, I set up my first business, which I ran for a few years, and again, ultimately it wasn't financially successful, so I moved on. But I'd always had an interest in going back to running a business of my own, but really hadn't come up with another idea or something that really I felt very strongly about until I was program director for something called the Islands Growth Deal. And in Scotland, the growth deals are investments that UK and Scottish government jointly make into local authority areas in Scotland. They started off with city growth deals, so Glasgow city region got the first growth deal, £1 billion from both governments. Then the other city regions all got their growth deals, and then eventually the opportunity to bid for a growth deal was opened up to all the rural parts of Scotland. So I led the development of the Islands Growth Deal, which was the growth deal for Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles. And one of the things that we looked at in that deal was what could the islands do with all the abundant renewable energy that was going to be generated on the islands and around the islands from onshore and offshore wind and eventually potentially wave and tidal energy, and rather than just export that to the mainland where it doesn't really bring much benefit for island communities, what could you do with all of that renewable energy? And one of the things that came up was you can produce green hydrogen. So that's where you take electricity and put it into a machine called an electrolyzer, and that splits water into hydrogen and oxygen. And we identified that could potentially create a whole new clean energy sector and industry for the islands that could bring jobs, economic growth, and also provide clean energy to decarbonise the island's own energy system. So it was that was my first exposure to hydrogen. I convinced myself that it had a role to play in addressing climate change. I personally wanted to do more, to do something about addressing climate change, and it just all clicked. I thought, okay, well, here is an opportunity to get into a business that I think can make a difference and could be successful, that excites me. And so when we signed the heads of terms with both governments for the Islands Growth Deal, which was a 100 million investment from both governments, I stepped back from that role and set up Plus Zero to try and move the hydrogen sector forward a bit more quickly and more directly through a business.
So what have you seen to be the trajectory of growth in this sector as of now?
So it's been very boom and bust is probably not the right word, but it's been slow and has been slower to develop than some had originally thought. So there was quite a bit of hype around hydrogen 3-4 years ago. Quite a lot of big announcements about major investments in producing hydrogen around the world, and probably not based on a very strong understanding of where the market was going, because there's no point in producing hydrogen if you don't have customers that want to use it. So I think quite a lot of that was probably unrealistic. So we've seen quite a number of announcements about some of the bigger projects, the higher profile projects that have subsequently been cancelled. So I know that has meant that quite a lot of the bigger companies and the investment sort of houses have pulled back a bit from hydrogen. But where you've taken a more pragmatic approach, and that's very much the approach we've taken in Plus Zero, to try and match critically get customers that want to use hydrogen and are committed to trying to decarbonise their own business. So trying to match that use case and demand for hydrogen with the hydrogen that you then produce, so that you get that balance between supply and demand. Where and we're not the only one doing that, but where that's been done, there is steady growth sort of happening in the market now. So we work very closely with the construction sector, and some of the major UK construction companies have been investing a lot of time and effort to test hydrogen technology, go through the learning curve themselves about how hydrogen can support their decarbonisation plans, and thankfully they're also very keen to work with small companies that are and help them sort of grow with them. So the hype hasn't been realised that there was around hydrogen a few years ago, and I think some of the speculative money has disappeared, but there is a sort of steady growth trajectory, I think. So eventually hydrogen will play a role in decarbonising our energy system. It's not going to do everything, but it does have a role to play in it. So it might take a bit longer to get there than people thought a few years ago, but we'll definitely get there.
Well, of course, hydrogen has a role to play in decarbonization of the whole planet as a whole, and like most technology, there will usually be the hype of it before the real thing. It's not as if the real thing is not there, but it is just hyped. Just if you remember the .com bubble, it wasn't as if technology is not going to be what it is today, but as of that time, early adopters had unrealistic expectation. So how are you managing, because you are also an early adopter of this technology, because you said you've convinced yourself to believe in this, which is something that is not usual. It's not something that is, it's a new face. Have you always been somebody that's always gone to the edge before?
Yeah, so I guess you could say I've always been somebody that liked to make things, like to take things apart, put them back together again. So I'm very practical in terms of I can do lots of things with my hands and tools and everything. So I've always been interested in making things and making things happen, and I guess trying to find solutions to issues. A lot of the roles that I've done in my career have been about trying to make changes in organisations, in some cases multiple organisations, and trying to bring groups of people along with to get behind those changes. So I guess all of that sort of falls into place with what we're trying to do, with Plus Zero and with the hydrogen sector. We're trying to find solutions to the requirement to replace our use of fossil fuels. And if you're somebody like me that really likes to try and find better and different ways of doing things, then that's a really exciting challenge. But equally, I'm not unrealistic about how difficult some of these things can do, because I think quite a lot of the companies that moved into hydrogen in the early stages and came up with big plans for building plants and things didn't quite understand how challenging it was going to be. So there's been a bit of a fallout from the, that's like the dot-com boom, I guess, as well, of companies that got in quickly thinking that there was lots of money to be made quickly, and then realised actually this is going to be a lot harder than we thought.
It's going to be a long way. It's not as if it is not there, but it's going to be a long way before the adoption. So and one of the things that you as an innovative person will know as understand intuitively and practically will be the fact that when anything is new, people are definitely going to be skeptical about it. The adoption rate is going to be very low, and people will. So how are you educating people to get them to be open to using this technology right now?
So I guess our approach has been to take a technology that everybody is very familiar with. So much of what we've done to date has been focusing on showing companies and organisations that use diesel generators for temporary power. So where you need electrical power, you don't have a connection to the grid, you generally will use a diesel generator to provide that power. So music festivals and events and construction sites, whole diesel generators are used for huge range of applications around the world. It's a massive industry in its own right. We reckon $20-30 billion just on the equipment alone on an annual basis, and you could probably multiply that by 10 by the amount of diesel fuel that's used to fuel the generators. So that's a technology that lots of people use and are familiar with. So we've said you can replace that diesel generator with a hydrogen fueled generator. It looks pretty much like the diesel generator that you've been working with. It just uses a different fuel, so it's using a compressed gas fuel rather than diesel. So it's made a sort of easier transition. The big change for them isn't the generator, because as I say, it looks like the generators they've been working with. The change is they're now having to use a compressed gas as the fuel rather than diesel, and which brings safety and related issues. But we put a sort of wraparound package, so we made it as easy as possible for the customer to adopt it. So we supply everything. We can provide the safety sort of assessment work for them. We can show them how it can be, how they can use that equipment very easily. We supply the hydrogen and all of the equipment. So try to make it as easy as possible for people to make that change. As I say, but the technology that we started on was something that everybody was familiar with. So we were not trying to completely change, make them do something that they'd never done before. So yes, that's probably how we've done it. Initially, we had to, in effect, pay for that, because we managed to persuade Scottish Government to give us a grant to help demonstrate that technology in Scotland. So we worked with Edinburgh International Festivals, and our very first hydrogen-powered event was a music performance by Scottish composer called Anna Meredith at the Edinburgh International Festival in 2021, and Scottish Government funded that, or we were able to deliver that using a grant that the Scottish Government had provided us. So that meant that the customer, Edinburgh International Festival, didn't have to pay for it, which obviously helps if you're getting something for free. And then, as I say, we did that complete wraparound package for them. So yeah, you try and make it as easy as possible for people to sort of test out the new technology that you're offering, and then hopefully they say, okay, this is not as hard as we thought it was, and they will want to do it more.